Hi everybody, in this video I'm going to go in and spend a little bit of time exploring numbering and how to configure the basics of it. I won't do an incredibly deep dive, but I will definitely cover a pretty broad range of ideas. This chapter is chapter 10, working with topics, so it's just called topics. If I press Control Tab, I'll switch over to my other file, which is topics unnumbered. In this one here, I've got a bunch of content, including these cross-references to tutorial overview, create a new topic, and close a topic. So those are the three subordinate sections that I have inside here. I'll continue to use Control Tab to switch back and forth between the files. And to get started, I'm going to actually just create a format that looks like this. It's a tag called bulleted, and you can see that this document has a lot of paragraph tags inside the catalog, whereas the unnumbered just has a couple of basic ones. I want to try to keep it really focused on just some of the core information that we need to work with. So what I'm going to do is click inside one of the paragraphs that I want bulleted, which in this case was tutorial overview, and that text is actually a cross-reference to the title tutorial overview. So if the title ever changes, the cross-reference would update, but I want this to be bulleted. So for starters, I'll open my paragraph designer, Control M, and inside it right away I'll choose Command's new format. Body paragraph is a pretty safe starting point for almost any tag. I'll call this one bulleted and create. Puts it into the catalog. You can see that it now exists in the catalog. It looks exactly the same as the body paragraph. There's no visible difference between them, but it's bulleted that I want to work with, and I'll make a few modifications. For starters, I'm going to switch over to the fourth tab. This is the one for numbering, and there's a set of building blocks that I can choose from. So if I click a building block, it's automatically inserted into this auto number format. And right now the two building blocks that I've clicked are the one to insert a bullet and the one to insert a tab. If you're ever looking at templates created in older versions of FrameMaker, you may see the bulleted reference as /B, \B. But FrameMaker now has the single symbol for the bullet followed by an automated tab stop, and I click Update All. So it'll change every single instance of bulleted, which is just this one paragraph. I'm also going to highlight a little bit of the create a new topic and close a topic and add bulleted to those. So you can see that the bullet now appears, then it has the tab stop, but they run directly into the text. Building numbering isn't just a matter of clicking on this fourth tab labeled numbering, but it's also often a need to work with the basic properties. If I change around the indents, and in order to make this work visually, I'm going to add some gibberish. I'll get rid of it in a few moments, but I'm going to add a bit of gibberish here. And you can see how the second line wraps here. And that wrap is right against the margin. So I'm going to do a couple of things. I'll give it a left indent, and I'm just going to arbitrarily decide on 1/2 inch and update all. And now that pushes everything over 1/2 inch on subsequent lines. It doesn't do anything to the first line. If I push the first line in 1/2 inch and I update all, everything's just indented, so it's not quite what I need. As a matter of fact, I'm going to split the difference and tell it the first should be 0.25, 1/4 inch update. And I'm going to create a new tab stop. To do so, I double-click New Tab Stop, and take a look at the value of the left indent, 1/2 inch. So my new tab stop should be the same, 0.5. You likely don't have to change anything else in here when you're working with numbering. It's good to know the options are in here, but you don't have to do much of anything with it in most cases. Continue, update all, and now it's indented. It doesn't look exactly the same as it did in the other document because I've just changed around some of the indents. I also got rid of some of that gibberish text that I typed in, and that was just there to test what the left indent did, the second line. So if I switch back, you'll see that it's pretty much dead on. There might be differences. For example, this has 5 points above and below, but again, 1/4 inch indent, 1/2 inch indent, a matching. And if I look at the tab and I compare the idea that the tab is inserted in the number and the value here, that's what causes the tab to both be created and to have the 1/2 inch indent. So it gives it a nice even indent. And again, in the numbering properties, all I did was the bullet symbol or /B /T for tab. That first piece is pretty simple to put together. I want to take a look at a couple of other things that can be done in here. Up at the beginning, I have the chapter 10, and this is actually set up to put in the word chapter and then put in the chap num. And that chap num is something that's driven at a higher level. When you create a book document, one of the things you can do is assign chapter numbering. So rather than having the chapter written into this as chapter 10, it's going to ask from a book document what is the current chap num and then display that value. If you ever want to change that inside a document, you can go in and you can modify the document's properties as far as numbering is concerned. And you'll see something that looks similar to the book with volume and chapter and section. So I'll click on chapter, and you can see that currently it reads chapter 10 in behind the scenes here. But the important piece here, and you don't need to change this inside your file because the book can do it, but it's the idea that it's going to continue the numbering from previous chapter in book. Therefore, previous chapter is 9, this one's 10, and the next is 11. Odds are you don't have to change that when you're working with a file because your book manages the information for you. I'm going to scroll down and take a look at a couple of other things. Tutorial overview. This is also set up to use the chapter number, and then it has punctuation, point, n plus. So that's what gives you the 10.1. And the n plus is an incremental counter. So if I highlight the next chunk of 10.2, create a new topic, you'll see that the heading 1 has the exact same code, still has n plus. What FrameMaker has basically done is it's come through and it said, look, every single heading 1 is going to have a specific rule. That rule is display the chapter number. So if this was chapter 9, it would read 9.1 and 9.2, and the reason it reads the 1 and the 2 is because the second field here says take the previous number and increment it by adding 1. So in this case, 10.1 because there was no previous value, and then 10.2 because it was able to read a previous value of 1. That numbering can also be changed. So I'm just manually deleting the N, and I'll put in an uppercase R for Roman numerals and update all. You'll see that my numbering becomes 10.1, 10.2, but those are Roman numerals. I also have lowercase Roman numerals, if that's the preference. And alphabetical uppercase, so 10.A and 10.B, or lowercase. I'm going to put it back to an N and update all. Then I have a couple of steps, and I have something that begins my step. This one's called number begin, and you'll see that this has something a little different. It has an S colon at the beginning. Now that first character can be anything. It can be S, it can be T, it can be A, it can be any character, and it's case sensitive. So you have a lot of options as far as what you put in there, and you don't have to put in a value. What this first character does is it acts as something called a series label. The series label is a way of differentiating this numbering system from any other. Because of the series label, it doesn't get impacted by anything that's happening up here. And the reason it doesn't impact it, this is not in any series. There's no letter at the beginning. And if there is a letter at the beginning followed by a colon, and it's not the same as the S that's here, no big deal. They are two independent streams of numbering, and you don't have to think about one or the other. 2, selected a new data file, new topic. That also is in the S series, but this time it's set up to be N plus. So it increments, it adds. You may also notice that there's an equals 0 that follows, and I'll get to that in a little bit. Focus first on just these first pieces. Launch FrameMaker is its own series, S colon, and N equals 1. Display numerically the very first value. If this N was an A, you would see ABC. If it was an R, you would see I, double I, triple I. So lots of options available to you. Which one is the right approach to numbering comes up basically day by day, client by client, and the decision is really going to be one of what is the right decision based on needs. It's not something where you have to individually go in and configure this over and over. It would generally be done on a template level, and then you never have to think about it again. That's sort of the ideal. So whether it's numeric or Roman or alphabetical doesn't make a difference as long as it's set up correctly. Let's go in and take a look a little further because I did mention this space equals 0. Right now, this numbered sequence has 2 components to it. The first is the 1, 2, and 3, and then the next piece reads space equals 0. It's inside a less than greater than. Basically, it's saying don't display a value, but reset it to 0, which at first might sound weird, but let's move down and take a look at something. Here, I have 11 with an A, B, C. That A, B, and C is set up, again, using the auto numbering, and here is the A plus. It also has a space inside the less than greater than. What it's doing in this case is it's going through and saying, look, appreciate the fact that there is a number at this level, but don't display it and don't change it. In other words, remember that this is under 11. Then alphabetically increment and add to the previous. Now there was no previous because we forced it to 0. If I click up here, and you remember that equals 0. So since this was 0, the very first, which is what the plus indicates, the very first is displayed as an alphabetical value. And that alphabetical value happens to be A and B and C, D and E. And if I was to come along and I change this one or this one or this one into a different format, watch what happens when I take C and I configure it to look like one of these, which is a number continue. So I'm going to take C, I'll press function 9 while I'm in the paragraph, and I'll start typing number continue, and then I'll just down arrow and press enter to select it. Now the C changes to a 12, and then it continues with an A and a B. And the reason that it's done this again, 12 increments in the series S, and it says add to the previous first level, which was 11. So therefore it's the next displayed as numeric, which is 12. It then resets the second level, which is what drives the A, B, and C. And when I click down into these paragraphs, they say acknowledge the fact that it's a 12, add, and display as alphabetical, and that's how you get your A, B, and C. I'm just going to undo the change to the format and continue to scroll down a little further, and I get to 10.3, and that has its own 1, which is a number begin, and 2, which is a number continue. Rather than putting in these exact values, I'm just going to go to my other document and give it a couple of new ones. They won't be exactly the same. I may change some of this around a little bit. It may happen to work out to be about the same thing, but I'm going to build it from scratch so that you can see how it works. Launch FrameMaker. This is currently set up as a format of short description, which is not at all what I need. And the same with several of the others that are inside here. So that's what's sort of keeping everything together. You'll see as I start changing, it may bounce things onto the previous page as I start to assign format. If I take a look at the paragraphs that are in here, I may want to go in and just do a couple of changes inside them in bulk. So I may want to select all of this and make it into something like a body or a bullet or a document title. I have to be a little cautious because in between I have a couple of paragraphs that are set up to be something called step indent. So in this sample, I already have indented pieces, and what I really need to do is come up with a nice clean format for the paragraphs that are in here. So for starters, commands, new format. I've clicked in launch. I'm going to give it the individual letter and definitely use a letter that makes sense. Now instead of S for series or step, I could go in and use T for task. However, T colon uppercase is almost always reserved for tables in default templates. So I don't like using uppercase T colon because it's for a table series. I also stay away from things like F because people sometimes go in and set up their figures to have titles, figure 1, figure 2, figure 3. What I'm going to do then is go in and explore what I'm working with. It's going to be procedure, so maybe I go with the letter P and a colon. Uppercase or lowercase, it doesn't matter as long as it's unique and you continue to use the same one. I'm going to call this procedure, begin, and create. Now I talked about the auto number format in the previous dialog. I should have addressed it inside here. In any case, T colon is table. F colon is usually for figures. And since I'm going with procedure begin, I'll call this one P colon. And then I will put in, and I'm writing it out long form, N equals 1. And I'll put in some punctuation and a tab stop. So I'm not accommodating the second level of numbering yet. I update all. And this paragraph is now set up with 1 point, and then it has the tab symbol. Remember I told you that these pieces have to work together, so I'll give it a left indent of 1/4 of an inch and a tab stop equal to the left indent, also 1/4 of an inch, and update all. Looks a little better. There are a couple of other things that I want to take a look at. One of them is the default font. For argument's sakes, I'm going to make the executive decision here to go with Myriad Pro for my font, and I'll go with 9 point for the font size and update all. So I'm changing around the look and feel of my material a little bit as I work my way through and develop the new formats. So that's my procedure begin for the font. I'll take a look inside here. It's currently set up to keep with next and previous, which I like for the first step. It ensures that this first step, oops, that's a variable, let me close that. It ensures that this first step isn't going to be in a situation where it appears at the top of the page on its own. I don't want create a new topic in this section, learn the basics of creating the data topic, and then next page it reads 1, launch FrameMaker. By keep with previous and with next, it also ensures that if it's going to go to the next page, because this piece goes, it grabs all of the content. So there's little considerations that you have to put into place as you create content. Here's where it gets fun. I'm going to take the next procedure begin, and the next procedure begin, and the next procedure begin, and click in them and just format them. And you can see I've put in a bunch of procedure begins. They read 1, 2, 3, 4, as I would hope, but in reality they read 1, 1, 1, 1, which is not at all what I'm shooting for. And that's because they're all set up to be a procedure begin. So again, I'm just going to highlight a little bit of this, commands new format, and the format that I'm going to create here is procedure continued, or you could do things like step and step next, or task first and task plus. Naming convention doesn't matter, just give it something that's pretty logical. Procedure continue, well, that doesn't need to keep with next or previous. So I'm going to cancel both of those and update all. That should be allowed to split between pages, because if I have step 7 and then step 8, that's a logical place where there should be a break. 1, I want to really keep kind of tight in there. I'll go over to the numbering and just change a tiny bit of this. N equals 1 becomes N plus. I want the plus to increment and display numerically. So this should become a 2 if all works well, and I update all, and it does. Now these didn't change, and the reason they didn't change is they're still a procedure begin. So I'll go in and make those into a procedure continue, and there's the page break that I expected to happen, because this paragraph, unlike the procedure begin, is allowed to split from the previous. We may see that happen again once or twice here. Procedure continue. Here's 3 in a row, so I highlight a little bit of each of them, procedure continue. Scroll downwards, open the tutorial, that's another procedure continue. Under file name, click save, update the content as follow. Those are all procedure continue. So you can see 9, 10, 11. This piece here, all of it, I want it to become, let's say, procedure sub. So commands, new format, procedure sub, and the procedure sub will also have a couple of changes that I've already made, like Myriad Pro, and changing the font to 9, and maybe I'll come along and I'll change the angle on these to be italic, and I update all. So the procedure sub is now set up in the new conveniently formatted setup that I've put in that differentiates it from everything else except numbering. I've got everything else working. I'll take a look in the number. This, I just want it to be alpha, A, B, and C. Now I could try to come along and set a new numbering system, maybe A for alpha, and then I'll put in something like A plus, punctuation, update all. I'll zoom in a bit on that so that you can see the 11, the 9, 10, 11, and there's my A. I'll create a couple of indents in order to push it in. I know that the indent for this was 1/4 of an inch. If I take a look, it's 1/4 of an inch on the left. So maybe I'll take these A, B, C, D, and all I need to do is click in one of them, because all of them will redefine when I change the rules. I'll give it a first indent of 0.25 and update all. Remove whatever override I happen to have. There it is, 1/4 inch indent. I'll give it a left indent of 0.5, 1/2 of an inch, update all. By the way, I'm going to get rid of this next paragraph tag as well. I don't want it to have a body coming after it. What that will cause it to have is the end of each of these, when I press enter, would revert back to a body, which is really frustrating if you're trying to put together a longer list. Turning off the next paragraph and doing my update all means that when I click at the end and I press enter, I get another identical paragraph, another procedure sub. Not directly related to numbering, but an important consideration when you're building content. You want to make sure that you test these. All right, left indent, I need a matching tab stop, 0.5, update all. That looks a little better. There's my A, B, C, D, E, Everything looks pretty much exactly as I would expect it to. And if I don't do any real testing on this, I may think that everything works great. But watch what happens when I take, let's take these two, 9 and 10, and make those into a procedure sub. They become A and B, but notice this continues with C. It's because procedure sub is inside its own series. That series is A. 9 is inside the P series, and the two series never interact with each other. The A, B, C, and D act as if this doesn't even exist. So what I need to do is connect the two of them to each other so that the 9 can restart. So I can put in something like this. I'll put in A equals 0. Now it's not perfect. It reads 5.0, 6.0, 7.0. So it's actually reading something, but it is resetting A equals 0. So let's see if I can get these to work. And the order of this doesn't matter. And what I'm showing you is intentionally introducing a couple of things that are a little buggy. And then I'll recap it in a few moments to give you the idea of what to think about when you build this. I want you to see, though, the development environment. So I'm going to change this from an A to a P so that it's part of the procedure and update all. And now it gets really weird. This is I and J because this was the 7th item and the 8th item displayed as a numeric. And if you go through the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, H is the 8th letter. So this was the added value displayed as a numeric, and it happens to be the 8th. The 9th is I, the 10th is J. So it's kind of getting closer. You can see the impact between them, but it's definitely not exactly what I want. This is where the space in between the less than and greater than comes into play. It says, understand that there was a value in the first level, which happens to be the 8, and in the second level, add and increment. Now I get AB, and I get an ABC down here, so it's working well, except that I have 5.0, 6.0, 7.0, 8.0, and it's because it's displaying the values. So what I'll do is get rid of the A and make it space equals 0. Update all. And now I get a 5, 6, 7. The path you've created is here. 8, this will be the location. 9, A and B. 9, A, B, C. And if I take these two and I change them back into my procedure continued, they become 9 and 10. 11 is correctly identified. A, B, and C is set up. So it's a lot of work to set up your paragraph numbering. There is planning that is involved in it. And there's a couple of things that I'd suggest you do when you build numbering. One of them is to set up a single document, maybe an Excel file, maybe a table inside FrameMaker. What I'll do is just create a quick portrait page. Just going to turn off the rulers. I'll turn off the borders. I'll turn off the text symbols so that we don't have any distractions on our table. I will insert a table. I'll go with the default, this 5, 6, 1, and 0, first column blue, and insert. And there's my table. Sample for numbering. This is part of my plan. So I come along and inside here, I'm going to put in series. And I'll think about some of the different things that I might number. I might number chapter, section. Let's do number step and number substep. I could have just gone step, I suppose, and substep, but in any case, series I'm not going to worry about too much. Chapter is $chapnum. That's a FrameMaker building block that you can just select. This table I highlight and I just make a little wider as well. And then section, should my chapters always restart sections? Maybe, so I'll put in a space equals 0 so that every chapter resets the section. But chapters don't really impact the number. If my step is 1, 2, 3, it doesn't matter if it's in chapter 8 or 88. That's not going to change. So section, I'll come along, and for the section, maybe I want to see the chapter number. So again, $chapnum. And in here, I'll decide my sections are A, B, C. So I would put in uppercase A or lowercase, but plus, and that's now going to give me, if it is chapter 8, I will get 8A, 8B, 8C. If it is 88, I would get 88A, B, and C. And I probably want some punctuation. So I'm just going to add a little bit of punctuation right there so that I get 8.A and maybe a colon after that and a single space. And the single space is a little tough to represent here because it's just a visual space, but if I turn on my text symbols, you can see that there is a space there that I had highlighted. So the space is added. Now I'll come along and I'll work with my numbers, my steps. So I'll give it S colon, it could be anything. It really doesn't have any impact what the chapter or the section is, but when I get to the step, I'm going to have a couple of different things inside here. I'm going to have one that's likely set up as n equals 1. That's my restart. I'm also likely going to have something in the S series, which is n plus for my continuation, because I want to be able to put in a step 1, but I also want the option for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And as I continue to develop this, I realize there will be a point where I want to show what the number is. So if it's 7, I want to show 7 and 7 and 7, punctuation, dot, and I'll put in R plus, dot, space. That's going to give me, if it's under 7, 7I, 7 double I, 7 triple I. And the other piece that I want to put into here is a placeholder. Sorry, wrong one. Is a reset. Space equals 0. Space equals 0. So those will reset the numbering. And I'll turn off my text symbols once more to make it a little easier to read. Careful, I put that in as an uppercase S. It should have been lowercase. Those will come across as two different series. And the last one I'm going to do is just plan for something called table. And now I've run out of room inside this. So maybe I make my series a little narrower. The same with my chapters and sections. I want to make sure chapter is wide enough that the word chapnum fits nicely. These I'll simplify a bit as well. I'll make it step and substep. And again, I can take both of those and make them a little narrower. And you can see why Excel might be a good way to work with this as well. And in here, I'm going to come along and I'm going to add a column. And I'm going to add that onto the right. It doesn't matter too much where I put the column. It's just for my convenience. But I'm going to go in and for T colon, I'll set it up so that it has table, and I'll go with capital A plus colon and a single space. So this will give me table A, table B, table C. So configuring and setting this up gives me a bit of a visual. I don't need to remember all of the gaps that are in here, but it makes it easy to align chapters and sections, steps and substeps, and in this case, table. And if it turns out that my table should actually be the equivalent of table 8.A, 8.B, 8.C, because I want it to be driven by the chapter number, I can come along in here and put in my chapnum, $chapnum. And the one other piece that I'd have to do, because this appears, I don't want it to be 8, then the word table A, table B. I want it to be table, followed by the chapnum, followed by punctuation. Ignore all of these, they don't exist. A plus. So my finished piece for the table, which I'm just going to write up at the very top of the document once to show you, would look a bit like this. T colon table, single space, $chapnum, point, A plus, colon, space. And the result of that would be something like this. Table 1, Table 2, Table 3 is a start, but I've actually changed mine to include $chapnum, point. And that gives me table 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and this is table 1.4. And that table numbering is coming from the current chapter number, which defaults to 1, and my incremental count of A plus. Why am I seeing 1.1, 1.2, 1.3? Because the FrameMaker default was an N. I changed that, update all, and now I get 1A, 1B, 1C, and 1D. FrameMaker has great numbering capabilities. I'm going to close this. You can always pause the video, rewind it 5 seconds, pause the video and take a look at it. FrameMaker has incredible capabilities when it comes to numbering. However, it requires setup. It's not something where out of the box all of the numbering that you need is there. Instead, you create the numbering that most represents exactly what you need. And the last one I'm going to put in here for the high level is the document title. And this one I'll type in chapter, single space, and then $chapnum. And by the way, if you don't want to memorize all of those and type them in, they're all in the building blocks here. Tons and tons of them in the building blocks, and you can work with those. So it's going to put in chapter, and then the chapnum will be 1 or 2 or 10 or 50 or 100, whatever it happens to be. Update all. There's my chapter 10. And if I go back to the other document, you can see at the beginning I have chapter 10. Working with topics, I happen to have highlighted too much. So there's working with topics on its own line. That is a heading 1. And the last piece is to configure heading 1 to pick up, here we go, $chapnum, which I'll scroll down and find, point, and I'll scroll up to find N plus, and then I'll put in some punctuation, let's say colon and a space, update all, and I get 10.1, 10.2, 10.3. So I've shown you numbering for tables, I've shown you numbering for paragraphs, I've shown you numbering as a way to build bullets, I've showed you numbering in order to put in a chapter number, and all of that numbering is done through the paragraph designer in this 4th tab for numbering. There's one more piece with numbering that I want to show you. It's not inside the other file, but it's an important one to be aware of. So here is a paragraph. It's tagged as a body. Suppose I want to create one for a note. Same idea. I come along, Commands, New Format. I name it something like Note. Put it in the catalog, apply it to the selection. The note, I'll do a little bit of formatting just to show you that it stands out a bit. 1/2 inch left, right. I'll make it fully justified. Update all. Want the note to stand out a little bit. Maybe I'll go to the font here, and in the default font, I'll change the color of my note as well so that it's red. Update all, and it's bold. The format is going to be kind of important when I go in and set it up, because any note that I have likely relates to whatever was above it. So I want to also make sure that this paragraph is set up to keep with previous. Update all. Now this is a short note. It's only 3 lines. If it was 4 or 5 or 6, I'd also want to potentially control widow and orphan lines. I'll go to this 4th tab, the one for numbering. And the auto number format doesn't have to be just one chunk of numbered code. It can actually be text. Remember we have earlier in here, chapter. We have the word chapter typed right into it. So using that idea, I can come down to the note, and I can put in auto number to be a word, note, colon, space, and update all. And that now adds the word note at the beginning. And the last piece in regards to this is to go in and change around the font. So what I'll do is take the bold off of this and watch the word note at the beginning. It, like everything else, becomes unformatted. But what if you want that one word to stand out? Well, you can even go in and configure the numbering to use a character tag such as bold. And when I update all, the word note appears in bold. The rest of the text continues. So let me close off the paragraph designer and do a recap. I went in, and in this case, I looked at a series label, and I thought, all right, all of my chapter level is going to be in the default series. So my chapters and my headings are all part of a default. They don't interrupt each other. They don't reset each other. However, when I got down to my procedures, I decided to put in a series label, and that really paid off when I got down to the point where I needed an A, B, C, D, and E. I just have to be really careful when I do that so that none of the numbering within the step and the sub-step information, so the procedures begin, continue, and sub, shouldn't interrupt each other. If I run into additional content, I can go in, set them up as begin, set them up as continue, set them up as sub. I get a 1, I get an A, I get a 2, whatever it is that I format. So that was the numbering that I worked my way through. Last piece, I come along and inside the document I choose Table Insert, Default Table. It has a paragraph up at the top. It is currently a body paragraph, which is not what I want. It is a very plain table, so I'm going to come in and using my paragraph designer, I'll create something here called Table Title, just from scratch so that you can see how this could be done. Update all, whoops, not update all, Commands New Format. I could type the name here after I did the Commands New Format. I could type it in the paragraph tag first. I create it. The auto number format for this will be T:, and for starters, I'll give it the word table, and then N plus colon single space. I update all. There's table 1. I think I'm going to make that bold, so I click bold and I update all. There's my table. This is a table title. If I click into the table, I can redefine the table. I'll just take this table and I'm going to control click to select it and then add a couple of rows and columns. Just add another one to the right, and maybe I'll come along and control click and then right click, add row or column, and I could add a couple of them, so I'll add 3 more to the right. And lastly, I'll right mouse click and under table, add row or column, and I'm going to add 1, not above, but to the heading. So now I have a heading, I have the body, I can do a couple control enters to add the body. I've defined the size, look of the table. It has this table title up here that's numbered, and here's the piece that gets to be important. Later on, if I insert a table and I use the exact same format, I get a table with nothing in it. What you need to do is remember to click in your table and through your table designer, do an update all. That takes a snapshot, and when it did the snapshot, it snapshots everything, including the format that's right up here, so that when I do insert a table, it inserts it and it picks up the correct table title up at the top, T:, table, N+. Let's go back to topics and go through from start to end with our numbering. The document number is chapter $chapnum. That gives us the word chapter automatically in the 10. The bullets are set up with a bullet and a /T. Remember that I also worked with indents and spacing, creating a first indent and a left indent and a tab stop that match each other. The 10.1, if we look at just the numbering, is also driven by the chapnum, and then it has punctuation N+, and there's a couple of spaces after it. So the format on this is to insert 3 spaces after each of the numbered pieces. Launch FrameMaker is set up inside its own series S, and that can be any letter. I suggest you avoid T or F and save those for tables and figures, but whatever you want. N equals 1 to reset, space equals 0 to reset but not display, the punctuation, and then the tab stop. And again, it has a set of properties for the left indent and the tab stop. Those are exactly the same when I get into the number continue. But the numbering code is slightly different. Still in the S series, still N, but this time a plus instead of an equals 0, and everything else is the same. Scrolling down, I get to my ABC, and all of these are set up in this case in the default that I was showing you, or the sample that I was showing as number sub alpha. They are also in the S series. They acknowledge that there is an 11, but they don't display it or change it. And then they put in an A+ so that I get my ABC, my punctuation, and my tab stop. That gives you an idea of numbering. Remember, your best bet is to go in, take a look at existing numbering that might be in a document. If you choose File, New Document, and you create a portrait page, inside that portrait page, there's already a couple of pieces that are numbered. There's a format called numbered 1. This is the first. There's one called numbered, automatically assigned. Why? Because this paragraph has a next rule. Let's try that again. Has a next rule for numbered. It's going to automatically add the numbered piece into there. So that's why I get the numbered appearing next. And I come along and the next, another one, the end. So that's already there. You can go in, you can take a look and see what's inside the numbered series, and sure enough, it's the N+, or up here, it is the N equals 1. It's not in its own series. This template doesn't have the same complexity. if I come along in the midst of this and I insert a table, so this one is a border of gray, it reads table 1. I'll insert another one up here. And then I'll just delete a little bit of the table in order to tighten it up. What I have is a 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the body, and a table 1 and a table 2. And this 2 and 3 don't mess with the table number because the table number is in that T series. There's a lot to think about with numbering. Your best bet, again, start with the defaults, poke around at it a little bit, build it up, take a look through the video, pause as you need to, and always take advantage of the documentation that's included with FrameMaker and any documentation you can find online in order to take a look at how numbering works. Hopefully this video is useful. It's a starting point for numbering. It's definitely not everything that you can do with numbering, but it should be enough to get you guided through the basic steps that are involved.